in that context, again, I would point out that this division, this polarization, this sense that too much is being asked of the wrong people is not unique to the U.S. I go to Europe a lot. Those of you who follow the European scene know that these conflicts over who will pay to deal with the current crisis are tearing up virtually every European society, both among countries, as I was saying before, and within countries. All of this is part of a more or less universal conflict over the distribution of the adjustment burden. Now, and in that context, I think it's important to recognize, especially for those of you who are interested in possible solutions, that another thing we know about debt crises is that the longer governments delay dealing with the underlying causes, the worse the crisis gets, right? Because the debts don't go away. And we have experience with this in the U.S., both internationally and domestically. The international, talk about the 1980s Latin American debt, the domestic ones, in the early 1980s, the American savings and loan industry, which essentially makes mortgage loans, went into crisis. And at that point, the Congressional Budget Office did a study and found that solving the problems would cost a few $1 billion. The estimates between $3 and $8 billion. Congress and the president temporized. They didn't want to deal with it because it meant eventually meant shutting down thousands and thousands of banks, which was not politically popular. And so they temporized and delayed and hemmed and hawed until 1987, 8, 9, until finally they couldn't delay any longer. And at that point, it cost $130 billion to resolve the savings and loan crisis. So the longer you let these debts fester, the more expensive it is to bail them out or to deal with them, and the worse the crisis gets. So it's not just disappointing or discouraging to observe that political systems are gridlocked and seem to be incapable of dealing with the underlying economic problems. It is also very bad news for those of us who would like to see some semblance of an adjustment and return to economic growth. That, by the way, is why, that concern is why the book that Tom mentioned, that Menzies Chin and I just have out, is called Lost Decades, because we clearly lost the last decade. Any economic growth in the US or Europe that was realized in the first part of the last decade was wiped out by the recession, and we are in danger of losing the current decade unless there are important and fairly substantial measures undertaken to try to resolve the aftermath of the debt crisis.